There are moments that split history into before and after. Shogun Kazuhiro was 42 years old when he committed the act that turned loyalty into betrayal, allies into enemies, and an empire into ashes. He didn't draw his sword against his own people. He didn't sell military secrets or trade his honor for gold. He did something far worse. On a battlefield soaked in blood, surrounded by the bodies of 3,000 fallen warriors, he found a girl, the 16-year-old daughter of the enemy general he had just slain. She was shivering in the cold autumn rain, kneeling beside her father's corpse, trembling so violently her teeth clattered like stones in a river. Kazuhiro should have ignored her. He should have ordered her execution. She was the enemy's blood, after all, and enemies deserved no mercy. He should have done what any shogun would do, win completely, without sentiment, without weakness. Instead, he removed his own cloak, the black one embroidered with the golden dragon crest, the symbol of his absolute power, and placed it around her shoulders. A simple gesture, a human one. And in that moment, he signed his own death warrant. Because his samurai, the same men who had fought and bled for him, who had sworn loyalty until death, looked upon that act of compassion and saw betrayal. They saw weakness. They saw a shogun who valued the life of an enemy more than the honor of his own clan, and when a shogun loses the loyalty of his warriors, he loses everything. This is the story of a man who chose humanity over code, of a girl who was meant to die but became his reason to live, and of how sometimes the bravest thing a leader can do is admit that power is not worth the price of his soul. But before we reach the end, before we discover whether Kazuhiro survived the fury of his own men, we must understand the beginning. We must understand who he was before that moment on the battlefield, and who he became after. The year was 1467. Japan was burning. The Onin War had turned the nation into a bloody chessboard where daimyos played with human lives as if they were disposable pieces. The shogunate, meant to unify the realm, had fractured into dozens of warring factions, each claiming legitimacy, each willing to burn the country to ashes to prove a point. Kazuhiro was shogun of the Hosokawa clan, not by birth, but by conquest. He had risen to power 15 years earlier through a mixture of military brilliance and calculated brutality. He wasn't the noblest, he wasn't the richest, but he was the most effective. And in times of war, effectiveness was worth more than gold. He ruled through equal measures of fear and loyalty. His samurai followed him because he never lost. His enemies feared him because he never showed mercy. Common folk whispered his name with both reverence and terror, the Iron Shogun they called him. The man who forged will into law and metal into destiny, but even iron, when bent too far, can break. Kazuhiro lived in a castle in Kyoto, a fortress that was part palace, part prison. He rarely smiled, rarely rested. Every decision he made was calculated to preserve power, expand territory, eliminate threats. He slept 4 hours a night, ate functional meals, never for pleasure. He had no lovers. Intimacy was vulnerability, and vulnerability was death. He was, in essence, exactly what a shogun was meant to be, a war machine wrapped in human skin. "You've forgotten how to be a man," his oldest advisor, a wise monk named Daisen, once told him. "You've become function, a role, nothing more." "Men die," Kazuhiro replied coldly. "Functions endure. I'd rather endure." "And when the function ends?" the monk asked. "When there are no more wars to fight, no more enemies to conquer, what remains of you then?" Kazuhiro had no answer, because he had never considered that there might be an after. War was eternal. Power was everything. The rest was distraction. And then came the Battle of Kōjōzan. Before we continue this story, if you believe that every choice has a price, hit subscribe and join us on this journey through the forgotten corners of Japan's past. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And when the story ends, give it a score from 0 to 10. Every comment, every rating helps this channel keep these stories alive. The Yamana clan had become an ever-growing thorn in the western flank of Kazuhiro's territory. Its leader, General Yamana Sozen, was a brilliant and fanatical strategist who believed that the legitimate shogunate flowed through his own bloodline. He had been preparing for a final confrontation for years, gathering allies, forging alliances, waiting for the perfect moment. That moment came in the autumn of 1467. Yamana marched with an army of 10,000 men, vowing to burn Kyoto to the ground and place a new shogun, himself, on the throne. Kazuhiro met him with 8,000, but his 8,000 had been trained since childhood, armed with the finest steel, led by a shogun who had never lost a battle. They clashed on the plains near Mount Kōjōzan on a day that began in thick fog and ended with autumn rain, turning the earth into red mud. The battle was brutal, 3 days of relentless fighting. Spears splintered, blades sang, men screamed, killed and died. Kazuhiro fought on the front lines, not because he had to, but because a shogun who didn't bleed beside his men didn't deserve to lead them. On the 3rd day, he met Yamana Sozen face to face. They fought beneath a heavy sky, surrounded by the chaos of the war they had both orchestrated. 2 masters of the sword, 2 men who embodied opposite philosophies of power. Yamana fought with righteous fury. Kazuhiro fought with cold precision. The duel lasted perhaps 5 minutes and felt like an eternity. It ended with Kazuhiro's blade piercing Yamana's chest, cutting through his heart, ending not only a life, but an entire bloodline of ambition. Yamana fell. His men saw. And they broke. The enemy line collapsed into a chaotic retreat that turned into a massacre. When silence finally fell, when the screams faded and only the groans of the wounded and the steady drumming of rain remained, Kazuhiro walked across the battlefield. 3,000 dead, perhaps more. Impossible to count, bodies piled like firewood, and it was there, near where Yamana had fallen, that he saw her. The girl was small, too thin, as if she hadn't eaten properly in weeks. She wore clothes that had once been fine, but were now torn and soaked with mud and blood. Her long hair clung to her face in the rain. She knelt beside Yamana's body, her tiny hands trying in vain to stop a wound that had long stopped bleeding. "Please," she whispered to the corpse, "please wake up. Please don't leave me." "Please." Kazuhiro stopped 3 meters away. Behind him stood his generals, 5 men who had served him for years, who sometimes knew his mind better than he did. "That's Yamana's daughter," one of them, General Hideki, murmured. "Naomi. He brought her to the field. Foolish. But she was there." "Then she dies," said another, General Takamori. "She's the enemy's blood. Letting her live is inviting future revenge." It was sound logic, the same logic Kazuhiro had lived by for 15 years. Eliminate every threat completely. Leave no seed that might grow into future rebellion. But as he watched the girl, this child who barely reached his shoulder, this orphan who had just lost everything, something in him hesitated. She didn't look dangerous. She looked broken. "Naomi-san," Kazuhiro said, stepping closer. His voice was gentler than he intended. "Your father is gone. You need to leave the rain." She looked up. Her eyes were wide, dark, filled with a pain so deep it seemed bottomless. "You killed him?" "Yes." "Then kill me too." It wasn't a plea. It was a command. "I have nothing. I am nothing. Just finish it." Kazuhiro should have agreed. He should have signaled one of his men, turned his back, and let cold justice take its course. Instead, he removed his cloak, the heavy black silk embroidered with a golden dragon, a symbol recognized by every soul in Japan, the cloak that proclaimed, "This man is Shogun," and he placed it around her shoulders. "You will not die today," he said quietly. "Come, let's get you out of the cold." The silence behind him was deafening. He could feel the shock radiating from his generals like heat from forged iron. But the act was done. There was no undoing it. He extended his hand. Naomi looked at it as if it were a serpent. Then slowly, perhaps because she no longer cared to live, or perhaps because she didn't know what else to do, she took it, and Kazuhiro led her away from the battlefield, wrapped in his cloak, protected by his power, unaware that he had just planted the seeds of his own destruction. The generals waited until they were back at camp before confronting him. Kazuhiro had placed Naomi in a separate tent, warm, comfortable, attended by servants. He had ordered that she be fed, given clean clothes, treated as, well, not a prisoner, not exactly. He wasn't sure what she was. Then he returned to his own tent and found his 5 generals waiting. Their faces were stone. "We need to talk," said Hideki, the eldest and most experienced. If there was a hierarchy among generals, he stood at its peak. "Speak," Kazuhiro said, removing his armor. His body ached with 1,000 small wounds. 3 days of battle left their mark. "What are you doing with the girl?" "Keeping her safe." "Why?" "Good question." Kazuhiro wasn't sure of the answer himself. "Because she's innocent. Because she poses no threat. Because," he paused, "because killing her would have been wrong." "Wrong?" Takamori stepped forward, the youngest, the fiercest. "With all due respect, Shogun-sama, right and wrong are luxuries. We are warriors. We do what must be done. And was it necessary," Kazuhiro asked, "to kill a child?" "She's not a child. She's 16. And she's the daughter of our greatest enemy. Letting her live, worse, protecting her, sends a message of weakness. It tells everyone the Iron Shogun has gone soft. It sends a message," Kazuhiro corrected, "that we are more than beasts, that we can win without destroying everything. That's not victory, that's sentiment." Hideki crossed his arms. "Shogun-sama, I've served you for 15 years. I've never questioned your decisions. But this is a mistake, one that could cost us dearly." "How so?" "Your men are already talking. I saw their faces when you placed your cloak on her. Confusion, disappointment, even anger. They risked their lives to win this battle. And now they see you protecting the daughter of the man who killed 200 of their brothers." Kazuhiro felt the words hit, because they were true. He had seen those faces. He had felt the air shift. "So what do you suggest?" he asked coldly. "That I kill her now, after I've already given her protection? Wouldn't that show even greater weakness? I suggest," Hideki said carefully, "that you find a way to remove her, send her to a convent perhaps, or a distant family. Just don't keep her near. Don't turn her into a symbol of anything that could fracture your base of power." It was wise counsel. Kazuhiro knew it, but something in him, something he couldn't quite name, resisted. "I'll think about it," he said. "For now, she stays, under my protection. And that is not open for debate." The generals exchanged glances. Then one by one they bowed and left. But Kazuhiro saw it in their faces. The loyalty that had once been absolute was beginning to crack, and cracks, once formed, only deepen. Naomi didn't speak for 3 days. Kazuhiro visited her, not often, but enough to make sure she was all right. She ate little, slept even less. She simply sat in the corner of her tent, wrapped in clean clothes far too large for her, staring at nothing. On the 4th day, she finally spoke. "Why didn't you kill me?" Kazuhiro was reviewing reports when she asked. He looked up. She stood at the entrance, thin, pale like a ghost, refusing to leave, "Because I saw no reason to. I'm the daughter of your enemy. Isn't that reason enough?" "Your father was my enemy. You are just you." He set the papers aside. "What's your name?" "Your real name, not the formal one." She hesitated. "Naomi, just Naomi." "Well then, just Naomi. Do you have family? Anywhere to go?" "No. My mother died when I was 10. My father had no other children. No uncles, no aunts, no cousins. I have no one." Her voice was flat, like she was reciting the weather. "That's why I asked. Why keep me alive when I'm nothing?" "Everyone is something," Kazuhiro said. Even when they can't see it. You speak like a philosopher. I thought shoguns were warriors. I can be both, can you? She tilted her head, studying him. Or do you just pretend to be a warrior while your heart stays soft? The question should have been an insult. Somehow it wasn't, maybe, Kazuhiro admitted. Or maybe I'm a warrior who forgot how to be human, and you reminded me. Naomi processed that. So I'm your, what, experiment? Charity project? I don't know what you are yet. It was more honesty than he usually allowed himself. But I know you're not my enemy, and I know you deserve a chance to find out who you are when you're not living in the shadow of war. For the first time since he'd found her, something changed in her face. Not hope, not yet, but curiosity. The first sign that maybe, just maybe, she wanted to keep living. May I ask you something? She said softly. You may. Your cloak, the one you put on me. Why? Kazuhiro had thought about that moment constantly since it happened. Because you were cold. And because, he paused, searching for the right words, because in 15 years as Shogun, I forgot what it was like to see someone suffering and simply care, not for strategy, not for gain, just because it was human to be cold and human to want to help. But now your generals hate you. They don't hate me. They're just confused, as I am, about what? About who I'm supposed to be. The shogun who wins every battle but loses his soul in the process. Or the man who sometimes makes a foolish human choice and accepts the consequences. Naomi took a step closer. If I had a choice, I'd vote for the second. Why? Because the first kind already exists in abundance. The world doesn't need another one of those. She smiled, small, fragile, but real. But men who choose humanity over efficiency, those are rare, worth protecting. And in that exchange, in those few quiet words, something changed between them. Not love, not yet, but recognition. The spark of mutual understanding between two people who had both forgotten what it meant to be whole. Kazuhiro didn't know it yet, but that spark would become a flame, and that flame would burn everything he had built to ashes. But it would also light the path towards something better, if he was brave enough to follow it. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Kazuhiro's life. Publicly, he was still the Iron Shogun, conducting matters of state, planning future campaigns, maintaining the territories he had conquered. But privately, he found himself spending more and more time with Naomi, not romantically. To him, she was still a child, the daughter of a fallen enemy, someone who should have meant nothing to his life. And yet there was something about her, an intelligence sharpened by trauma, a quiet perception that cut through pretense. You know, she said one evening while they ate, he had begun inviting her to share his meals, another act that made his generals exchange wary glances. Your men call you Oni, behind your back. Oni, demon, monster, I know. It's intentional. To make people fear you? Fear keeps order. Love is fickle. But fear, he tapped his chopsticks lightly, fear is reliable. Naomi considered that. My father used to say something similar, that love was weakness, that a leader who was loved could never be truly respected. She looked directly at Kazuhiro. He died believing that. Do you think he was right? I don't know, maybe not. Kazuhiro pushed the rice around his bowl. All I know is that it worked for 15 years. Then you appeared, and now I'm questioning everything. I didn't ask you to. No, you just existed. And somehow, that was enough. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Naomi spoke again, her tone softer. You're lonely, aren't you? That's why you spend time with me. Not because you want me here, but because you're tired of being alone. The words hit closer than he expected. Maybe, Kazuhiro admitted. Or maybe you just ask better questions than most. And I'm tired of conversations that are only about troop numbers and political calculations. So I'm being useful. Then entertainment for a bored shogun. No, you're being... He paused, searching for the right word, human, and reminding me how to be the same. Naomi smiled. And this time, the smile reached her eyes. But outside that private chamber where they shared those quiet conversations, the situation was deteriorating. The generals never confronted Kazuhiro again, not directly. But he saw the signs, meetings he wasn't told about, conversations that ended the moment he entered the room. And more troubling still, small acts of disobedience, orders taking longer to be carried out, suggestions quietly forgotten. His authority was eroding, like a glacier melting, slow but inevitable, and everyone knew why. The girl, the enemy's daughter, the living symbol that their shogun cared about something beyond victory, and that was unforgivable. The crisis came 2 months after the battle. Kazuhiro woke to find his castle surrounded. Not by outside enemies, by his own samurai. 500 of them, led by the 5 generals, all armed, all wearing white sashes, a symbol of mourning, a symbol of protest. Hideki stood at the front. When Kazuhiro emerged, deliberately unarmed, the general bowed. It was empty reverence, only form. Shogun-sama. We have an ultimatum. Speak. The girl, Naomi, must be removed, sent away or executed. We do not care which, but she cannot remain. Why not? She is destroying you. She is destroying us. Hideki gestured to the men behind him. We all swore to follow the Iron Shogun, a man who never showed weakness, never hesitated, never let emotion cloud his judgment. But that girl, she has changed you. Made you weaker. She has made me more human. We do not need human. Takamori shouted. We need a leader. We need a shogun. And you are neither. The blow of those words was physical. Kazuhiro had seen disloyalty before, betrayal, but never from men who had bled with him, fought at his side, trusted him completely. So what do you propose? He asked calmly. Mutiny. Will you kill me? We do not want your death, Hideki said. We want you to be who you were, and that means removing the distraction. The girl goes, or we go. It was an impossible choice. Lose Naomi, who in 2 months had become something Kazuhiro could not name but knew he needed, or lose his army, the base of his power, everything he had built for 15 years. Logic said, choose the army. Logic shouted it, but something deeper than logic, something that awoke the moment he wrapped his cloak around that frozen girl, said no. No, Kazuhiro said quietly. She stays, then you choose. Hideki drew his sword. Not to strike, only to show. Shogun-sama, I have served you 15 years, but I cannot serve a man who has betrayed everything that makes us samurai. Therefore, he planted the blade in the ground. I ask for your death, for disgracing the code, for placing the feelings of an enemy above loyalty to your men, for forgetting that the shogun does not belong to himself. He belongs to Japan. One by one, the other 499 samurai planted their swords too, 500 blades, 500 demands for death. And Kazuhiro, the Iron Shogun, conqueror of provinces, the man who had never lost a battle, stood alone before them. No army, no power, only an impossible choice and consequences that would change everything. The silence that followed was the kind that comes before an earthquake. Dense, compressed, humming with held energy, ready to break. Kazuhiro looked at the 500 swords driven into the earth. 500 judgments. 500 men who had decided he was no longer worthy to lead. He should have felt anger, outrage, betrayal. Instead, he felt only a strange, cool clarity. The same clarity he experienced on the battlefield when everything slowed and he could see every move. Every consequence, the whole board at once. You asked me to kill an innocent girl, he said finally, his voice carrying over the assembled 500 samurai, to prove I am still worthy of leading you. Yes, Hideki answered, because a shogun who cannot make the hard choice is not a shogun. He is only a man, and men do not rule empires. And if I refuse, then you abdicate, and we choose a new leader. Someone who has not forgotten what it means to be a warrior. Kazuhiro nodded slowly. I understand. So you have already decided. This is not negotiation. It is execution dressed up as choice. It is justice, Takamori corrected. You broke the code. You put compassion for an enemy above loyalty to your men. There is a price for that. There is, Kazuhiro agreed. And I'm willing to pay it. but not in the way you imagine. He turned and walked back toward the castle. The samurai watched, puzzled. This was not surrender, not a challenge. It was something they could not name. Kazuhiro entered his private chambers. Naomi was there. She had heard everything, standing by the window, her face pale. "You should kill me," she said immediately. "They are right. I'm destroying you. Now you are saving me." They simply do not see it yet. He moved to the cabinet where he kept his most precious things. He opened it and withdrew something wrapped in silk. It was a sword. Not his battlefield katana, but the ceremonial blade, the sword of his father and his father before him. The blade that symbolized the lineage of the Hosokawa clan. "What are you doing?" Naomi whispered. "Something I should have done long ago." He wrapped the sword again, placed it under his arm. "Come with me. You need to see this." "See what?" "How a man decides what truly matters." They returned to the courtyard. The 500 samurai were still there, restless now, the tension rippling like wind through tall grass. Kazuhiro walked until he stood directly before Hideki, and then he did something no shogun in the history of Japan had ever done. He knelt. He placed the ceremonial sword on the ground between them and bowed, not a formal gesture of respect, but full prostration. His forehead touched the earth. "What?" Hideki began. "You're right," Kazuhiro said, his voice muffled but steady. "I have changed. The girl changed me. I'm no longer the Iron Shogun who conquered provinces without hesitation. I'm something else now." "Then you abdicate?" "No, I am asking." He lifted his head just enough to meet Hideki's eyes. "I'm asking you to trust me, not because I've always won, not because I'm efficient or feared, but because maybe what Japan needs now is not another demon. Maybe it needs someone who remembers how to be human. Humanity is weakness. No, humanity is strength you don't yet understand. Because it takes courage, far more courage than killing, to choose mercy. To look at an enemy and refuse to strip them of their humanity. To admit that power without compassion is just tyranny in fine clothing." The silence that followed was absolute. 500 men watched their shogun, the man who had never bowed to anyone, lying face down before them, pleading. "But if you cannot trust that," Kazuhiro continued, "then here is my offer. Take this sword, the sword of my clan. Execute me. Place a new leader in power, and afterward you will still have to kill the girl, because she is guilty of nothing except existing. And if you kill her, you prove that it's not I who have forgotten the code, it's the code that has forgotten humanity." He closed his eyes and waited for the strike, but it didn't come. Instead, he heard a different sound, the scrape of a blade being lifted from the ground. Not to attack, to sheath. He opened his eyes. Hideki had retrieved his sword and was looking down at Kazuhiro with an expression that might, perhaps, have been respect. "You're a fool," the general said quietly. "The greatest fool I've ever known, probably, but maybe," Hideki looked back at the men behind him, "maybe it's the kind of foolishness we need, the kind that reminds us we fight to protect, not just to conquer." One by one, the other samurai began to sheath their swords. Not all of them, perhaps half, but half was enough. Takamori did not sheath his. "This is a mistake." "You'll see. He'll lead us to ruin." "Maybe," Hideki agreed. "But it will be our choice to follow him. And if we fall, we'll fall as men, not as machines." Takamori spat on the ground, turned, and walked away. Around 100 samurai followed, those who could not accept change, who needed the Iron Shogun and could not embrace what he was becoming. Kazuhiro watched them leave. Each one was a loss. Each one weakened his power, and yet strangely, he did not feel weaker. He felt lighter, as if he had been carrying a weight for 15 years and had finally set it down. "Shogun-sama," Hideki said, extending his hand. "Stand! Shoguns do not kneel. This one does," Kazuhiro replied, taking it, "when necessary." And as he rose, he saw Naomi watching from the balcony. Tears streamed down her face. But she was smiling, and in that smile, Kazuhiro saw something he had not seen in years. Hope. The weeks that followed were weeks of rebuilding. The samurai who had left with Takamori needed to be replaced. Alliances needed to be strengthened, and more importantly, Kazuhiro had to learn what it meant to be a leader who admitted imperfection, one who chose humanity, who no longer pretended to have all the answers. It was harder than 15 years of conquest. "You're trying too hard," Naomi observed one night. She had begun to act as an unofficial advisor, not by any formal title, but because Kazuhiro found her insights were often sharper than those of his generals. "How so?" "You're trying to be the perfect shogun and a compassionate man, but sometimes those things conflict, and when they do, you freeze. So what do you suggest?" "Stop trying to be perfect. Just be you, whoever that is now. And what if me isn't enough?" "Then it isn't, but at least it'll be real." It was simple wisdom, almost childish, but it carried a truth none of his generals' strategic council ever did. "How old are you again?" Kazuhiro asked. 16. "Why?" "Because you speak like you're 60, Naomi shrugged. "Growing up in a war zone speeds that up. You learn to see through lies or you die, and you see through my lies." "Constantly," she smiled. "But I also see a man who's trying, truly trying, and that's rare, especially among people with power." Kazuhiro felt something tighten in his chest. It wasn't pain, it was something warmer, more dangerous. He was starting to care about her, not as a ward or responsibility, but as a person, as an equal, as someone whose opinion mattered more than it should, and that terrified him, because every time he had cared about something, every time he had let connection in, the world had taken it away. His family, during his rise to power, his friends, turned rivals by politics. Even his ability to feel joy had been sacrificed on the altar of efficiency. He had built an entire life on not caring too much. And now this girl, this orphan who should have meant nothing, was dismantling it all. "You're afraid," Naomi said softly. "She always saw too much." "Of what?" "That you'll become a weakness. That my enemies will see how much you matter and use it against me, then send me away. Easy. It's not, because I've tried. Every morning I wake up planning to send you to a convent, to a distant family, to anywhere far from here. And every morning I find a reason to delay. Why?" Kazuhiro had no answer. "Or perhaps too many, because when you're here," he said finally, "I remember why any of this matters. Why I fight. Why I built this empire. It's not for power. It's not for legacy. It's for," he gestured helplessly, "for moments like this, where I can have a real conversation with someone who doesn't fear me, who sees me as a person, not a position." Naomi was silent for a long moment. "You know you can never truly keep me safe, right? No matter how many guards you post or how high you build your walls. If someone wants to hurt me to get to you, they'll find a way, I know. And still you keep me here. I still keep you here. Why?" She held his gaze, forcing honesty. "Because for the first time in 15 years, I'm not alone. And I've realized I'd rather die vulnerable than live invulnerable." The words hung between them like a confession. Naomi stepped closer. Not intimately. She was too wise for that, and the difference in age and power made anything else impossible. But she took his hand. A simple gesture, human. "Then we stop pretending," she said. "You stop pretending this is about duty or responsibility, and I stop pretending I plan to leave someday. We admit what it is, two lonely people who found something precious in each other, and we protect it, together, and when the world tries to take it, then we fight, but we fight together. Not you protecting me like something fragile, but side by side, as equals," Kazuhiro wanted to argue. He wanted to list 1,000 reasons why this couldn't work. But looking at her, at this girl who had lost everything yet still chose hope, still chose connection, he found he couldn't. "Agreed," he said. "Partners, partners," she echoed, and in that agreement something fundamental shifted. They were no longer shogun and refugee. They were two souls trying to navigate an impossible world, together, but the world, as always, had other plans. The threat came from a direction Kazuhiro had not anticipated. Neighboring clans, watching his change in behavior with growing interest, decided a compassionate shogun was a weak shogun, and weakness invited attack. 3 daimyos formed an alliance. Not large enough to conquer all of Kazuhiro's lands, but enough to inflict serious damage. Their plan was cruel in its simplicity. They would kidnap Naomi, use her as bait, force Kazuhiro to choose between rescuing her or protecting his territory. The intelligence arrived through loyal spies. Kazuhiro still had some, though far fewer than before. The enemy alliance planned to strike during the New Year festival, when guards would be relaxed and Naomi would likely be more exposed. Kazuhiro called a war council, Hideki, the remaining generals, and for the first time, Naomi. The generals protested at her presence. "This is a military matter. This is a matter about her," Kazuhiro cut in. "She deserves a voice." Naomi sat calmly as they argued strategy. Increase the guards, move her to a safer location, even stage her death and hide her completely. Or, Naomi said when they paused to breathe, "You use me as bait." A stunned silence. "Absolutely not," Kazuhiro said immediately. "Why not? They want to kidnap me. Let them try, but on ground you control, under rules you set. Turn their ambush into yours. It's too risky." "Everything is risky," Naomi replied. "But this gives us the advantage." And she looked straight at him. "It proves the point you've been trying to make, that compassion is not weakness. That protecting me doesn't mean treating me like a fragile object, but as a partner who can contribute." Hideki nodded slowly. "She's right, strategically. If we set a perfect trap—" "No," Kazuhiro repeated firmer. "I will not risk her, period." "Then you treat me exactly like your generals feared," Naomi said quietly. "As a weakness, as something to be protected, not as a person with agency." The words landed like a physical blow. "This isn't about agency," Kazuhiro said, though his voice sounded hollow even to himself. "It's about keeping you safe." "Safe?" Naomi stood. "Shogun-sama, Kazuhiro, you told me yourself, I will never be truly safe. As long as I matter to you, I'm a target. So choose. Hide me behind walls that will eventually be scaled, or let me fight by your side. As a partner, as you promised." She was right. Kazuhiro knew it, but admitting it meant putting her in deliberate danger. Every instinct screamed against that. "If we use her as bait," he said slowly, "I will command the operation. Personally, I will not leave it to others." "I agree," Hideki said at once, "and she is protected at all times. At the first sign of real danger, she is removed." "I agree," Naomi said, and Kazuhiro looked at her. "You promise me this. If I order withdrawal, you obey. No arguments, no heroics. Just survive." Naomi held his gaze. "I promise." "If you promise the same, that you will not die foolishly trying to save me, that you will survive because you matter too." It was a strange bargain, but it was honest. "I promise," Kazuhiro said. With those mutual promises, they sealed each other's fates, for better or worse. The plan was simple. Naomi would attend the New Year ceremonies. She would be visible, apparently vulnerable. The kidnappers would try to take her in the chaos of the festivities, but what they would not know, 200 loyal samurai would be disguised among the crowd. Every escape route would be blocked. It would be a perfect trap, except that on the morning of the festival, one of the servants who cared for Naomi was found dead, poisoned, and clutched in his hand a note. "The girl is mine. Not the Shogun's, not the kidnappers. Mine. I will come for her. Not tomorrow. Not during the festival. But when you least expect it. And when I do, the Shogun will bleed for every day he kept her from me." Takamori, the general who had left. The man who saw Kazuhiro's compassion as betrayal. "He's here," Hideki said, reading the note. "In Kyoto, watching, waiting. Then we find him," Kazuhiro said. "Before the festival. Impossible. He knows this castle as well as we do. He knows every hiding place. If he wants to stay hidden, he will. So what do we do?" Naomi spoke. "We use it. He wants to kidnap me. The other daimyos want to kidnap me. Let them all try, and see who survives." "This is insane," one of the generals protested. "You're talking about turning the festival into a battlefield." "It already is a battlefield," Naomi replied. "We just haven't admitted it yet." She was right. And Kazuhiro hated that she was right. He hated that he would have to put her in harm's way. He hated that every choice seemed to lead to more pain, but more than anything, he hated that he was beginning to understand what Takamori had seen, that he had changed, that what he now felt, because it was love now, he could no longer deny it, had made him vulnerable in ways power never had, and vulnerability, in a world like theirs, was an invitation to be destroyed. We do it, he decided, but with one change. Naomi does not go to the festival. I go. What? I wear her clothes. From a distance, with my face covered during the ceremonies, no one will know. The kidnappers will attack thinking they have her. They will discover they have taken the Shogun. And then, he managed a humorless smile, then I will remind everyone why they used to call me demon. And me? Naomi asked. You stay here, hidden, safe, with guards, I trust. And when it is over, when the threats are eliminated, you come back. But this is not a debate, Naomi-san. It is an order. From your Shogun. His voice was steady. You made me promise you would survive. Now I make you promise the same. Stay, live, and let me do what I was born to do, protect what matters. Tears filled her eyes. She nodded. I promise. And so the plan was rewritten. Kazuhiro would become the target. Anyone who wanted the girl would have to go through the Shogun first. It was a trap. It was risk. It might be a death sentence, but it was also a choice. And Kazuhiro was tired of letting others set the terms. If they wanted to fight, they would fight on his terms. And if he was to fall, he would fall defending what he had finally learned to value more than power. The morning of the New Year festival broke cold and clear. Kyoto was draped in red and white lanterns, its streets crowded with citizens celebrating the rebirth that each new year promised. There was music, laughter, the scent of roasted chestnuts and freshly pounded mochi in the air, and beneath all that celebration, unseen, unspoken, ran hidden currents of violence waiting to explode. Kazuhiro wore Naomi's garments, an elaborate kimono in deep shades of purple and silver, his hair tied in a noble woman's style, his face veiled behind the ceremonial silk that aristocratic women wore during public rituals. From a distance, especially within the crowd, the illusion was flawless. You look ridiculous, Hideki muttered as the final adjustments were made. I look like a target, Kazuhiro corrected. That's all that matters. Beneath the kimono, he wore light armor, hidden within his sleeves twin daggers, and strapped discreetly across his back, within reach but invisible, his katana, its blade slightly shortened to rest beneath the fabric without giving away its presence. He was bait, but bait with teeth. Naomi remained hidden deep within the castle's inner chambers, guarded by 20 of Kazuhiro's most loyal samurai. She had protested until the final moment, only falling silent when Kazuhiro had said something that stripped away all argument. If you die because of me, I will not survive it. Not because I'm weak, but because I'll have lost the only reason any of this matters. So please, for me, stay safe. Now, as he walked through the castle gardens toward the public pavilion where the ceremonies would take place, Kazuhiro felt the strange calm that always came before battle. The world sharpened. Every sound, every flicker of motion, every breath of wind carved itself into perfect clarity. The 200 disguised samurai were already in position. He saw them, merchants standing a little too straight, monks watching a little too closely, musicians whose instruments hid weapons instead of melodies. The net was set. Now all that remained was for the prey to take the bait. The New Year ceremony began at noon. Kazuhiro sat upon the raised platform, surrounded by priests performing the ancient rites of purification and blessing. His head was bowed, the veil concealing his face entirely. To every watching eye, he was Naomi, the daughter of the slain enemy general, the girl who had somehow captured the heart of the Iron Shogun. The crowd was immense. Thousands pressed together to witness the spectacle, because in times of war, moments of beauty and tradition were rare. People clung to them like shipwrecked souls to drifting wood, and somewhere within that crowd, predators waited. Kazuhiro saw the first movement an hour into the ceremony. 3 men, dressed as castle guards, but their faces were unfamiliar. They moved through the masses with deliberate precision, converging on the platform. Impostors. The allied clan's kidnappers. Kazuhiro gave a subtle signal. His disguised samurai shifted into place, sealing off escape routes, but did not strike yet. The trap needed to close completely. The 3 impostors ascended the platform. One of the priests began to protest, but was silenced by a flash of steel, not a killing blow, just a warning. The others recoiled, terrified. "Naomi-sama," one of the impostors said, his voice falsely polite. "You'll come with us now. Our lords have—" In questions, Kazuhiro kept his head lowered. He allowed them to seize his arm, rougher than anyone should dare with a noblewoman. But these men were long past etiquette. They guided him down from the platform. Through the sea of confusion and fear, perfect. The farther from the civilians, the better, fewer innocents to bleed. They reached the outer gardens. Open ground, fewer witnesses. The impostors relaxed, thinking the hard part was over. That was when Kazuhiro struck. He spun, breaking the man's grip with a motion he had practiced 1,000 times. His hand flashed into his sleeve, drew the hidden dagger, and slashed through the throat of the nearest impostor before the man could even gasp. The other 2 reacted, drawing their swords, but Kazuhiro was already moving. He tore his katana free from beneath the kimono in a fluid motion, deflecting the second man's strike and countering in a single seamless sequence that ended with the blade buried in the man's heart. The 3rd impostor froze, realization dawning. "You're not—" "No," Kazuhiro said, lifting the veil away. "I'm not." The man turned to run. He didn't make it far. 3 of Kazuhiro's disguised samurai emerged from the shadows, blocking his path. He was disarmed and forced to his knees. "How many?" Kazuhiro demanded, pressing his blade against the man's throat. I don't—" "Lies bore me." The pressure increased. Blood welled against the edge of steel. "How many more?" "How many of you are inside my castle?" 10, the man spat finally. 10 of us. But it doesn't matter. They're already moving. He never finished. An arrow pierced his throat, silencing him forever. Kazuhiro spun, searching for the archer. But whoever it was, they were gone. And then came the screams. Not from the gardens, from deep inside the castle, where Naomi was hidden. His blood turned to ice. "Trap," Hideki hissed, sprinting toward him. It was a double trap. The kidnappers were a distraction. The real threat— "Takamori," Kazuhiro finished, already running, shedding the heavy kimono as he moved, revealing the armor beneath. "He used the kidnappers to draw us out. And now he's inside. With her." They raced through the castle corridors. Other samurai joined them, a surge of warriors converging toward the heart of the stronghold. But Kazuhiro knew with sick certainty they would be too late. Takamori had planned this perfectly. The inner chambers were a slaughter. The 20 guards Kazuhiro had left to protect Naomi lay dead or dying. They had not fallen in honorable combat. They had been butchered. Throats slit from behind, fast-acting poisons, arrows loosed in the dark. And at the center of the bloodshed stood Takamori, holding Naomi in his grip, a knife pressed to her throat, the other arm wrapped tight around her waist. She was pale but not crying. When Kazuhiro burst through the door, their eyes met, and in that look was a silent apology. "Shogun-sama," Takamori said, his voice unnervingly calm. "Good that you came. I was beginning to think I'd have to start cutting her in pieces to get your attention." "Let her go," Kazuhiro said, his voice dangerously low. "Now, and I will make your death quick." "Quick?" Takamori laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Do you think I fear death? I embrace death, because what you have become, what she's made of you, is worse than death. It is betrayal of everything we are. You betrayed nothing. You betrayed everything." Takamori roared. The knife pressed harder. A thin red line welled at Naomi's throat. "You were the Iron Shogun, invincible. And then this child appeared and you grew soft, pathetic human. Being human is not weakness. It is when you are Shogun. You cannot afford feelings. You cannot afford love. Because love, he spat the word, is a chain, a vulnerability. A blade enemies will use to cut your throat. So you do it? Kazuhiro stepped forward slowly. You become the blade? You prove my point by killing her. I am not killing her to prove a point. Takamori's voice went colder, more dangerous. I am killing her to save you, to cut the cancer before it spreads. And then, when she is gone, you will remember. You will become the shogun we need. You are mad. No, I am loyal. More loyal than you. Because I will do what must be done. Takamori looked at Naomi. No offense, girl, but you have destroyed the best man I ever knew. I cannot let that stand. He drew the knife back, preparing the final cut, and Naomi moved. Kazuhiro did not know she had been training, not enough for war, but enough for a sliver of chance. She had begged a few warriors to teach her basic defenses. The lessons were crude, awkward, but she had learned to use weight and surprise. She stomped down hard on Takamori's foot, then drove an elbow into his ribs. It was an amateur's move, clumsy, imprecise, but it was unexpected. The grip around her slackened for a heartbeat. It was all Kazuhiro needed. He moved faster than he thought possible. His blade sang as it left the scabbard, slicing the air where Takamori had stood a moment before. But Takamori, too, was a master. He shoved Naomi aside, rolled, and rose with his own blade bared. Finally, Takamori breathed, a cruel pleasure in his tone. Real fight, not politics, not words. Only steel. They collided. It was a duel between two men who knew each other completely, who had trained together, fought side by side, and bled for the same banners. There were no surprises. Every move was anticipated, every strike met with a counter, every step mirrored like reflections in steel. But there was a difference now. Takamori fought with rage, with desperation, with the need to prove himself right. Kazuhiro fought with purpose, with clarity, with a love that did not weaken him, but focused him. Blades sang. Sparks flew where steel met steel. They danced through the chamber, shattering furniture, slicing through silken banners, turning a sacred space into a battlefield. You could have been perfect, Takamori growled, blocking a blow that would have taken his head. You could have united all of Japan. I don't want a united Japan, Kazuhiro answered, striking low, then high. I want a Japan worth uniting, one where power serves humanity, not devours it. Idealist, fool, weak. No. Kazuhiro found an opening. His blade cut through Takamori's guard, biting deep into the general's shoulder. Strong enough to admit I was wrong. Takamori staggered back, blood dripping down his arm. But he didn't fall. Killing me proves nothing. I don't intend to kill you. Kazuhiro lowered his sword slightly. I surrender. Shock crossed Takamori's face. What? You're right. About everything. I've changed. I've grown weaker as a commander, more vulnerable. All because I chose love over power. Kazuhiro laid his sword on the floor. So if you must kill me for that, for choosing humanity, then do it. Prove that strength matters more than compassion. That power means more than connection. Takamori stood frozen, bleeding, confused. His sword trembled in his hand. Kill me, Kazuhiro repeated, sinking to his knees. Or admit that maybe there is a way to be strong and human, powerful and compassionate. Shogun and man, the silence stretched. Takamori looked at Kazuhiro kneeling before him, at Naomi standing frozen, her hands covering her mouth, at the samurai gathered in the doorway, waiting to see how it would end, and slowly, painfully, Takamori lowered his sword. I can't, he whispered. I can't kill you, because you're already dead. The man I followed, he's gone. And what remains? He looked at Naomi. What remains is something I don't recognize. Then learn to recognize it, Kazuhiro said softly, or walk away. But stop trying to kill the future just because you fear change. Takamori stood there for a long moment. Then he let his sword fall. He fell to his knees. And for the first time since Kazuhiro had known him, the fierce general began to cry. I don't know how to be what you are, he confessed. I don't know how to be strong and vulnerable, to lead and still love. I thought I knew. I thought the path was absolute clarity, absolute strength. But you—" He looked up. "You proved me wrong. And it terrifies me." Kazuhiro stepped closer and placed a hand on his shoulder, not as shogun to subordinate, but as friend to friend. "It terrifies me too," he admitted. "Every day. But I've learned it's better to live afraid and human than to live unfeeling and hollow." Takamori nodded slowly. "What happens to me now? You choose. Stay and learn this new path with me, or leave and find your own. But stop trying to destroy what you don't understand. Can I think about it?" "As long as you need." Takamori rose with effort. He turned to Naomi. "I'm sorry for frightening you." "For almost." His voice broke. "You don't owe me an apology," Naomi said quietly. "You owe one to yourself. For refusing to believe men can be more than weapons." Takamori nodded, then, clutching his wounded arm, walked out of the chamber. Kazuhiro turned to Naomi and drew her into an embrace, part relief, part promise, part love. "Are you hurt?" He murmured into her hair. "I am now." "Fine, you moved. You created the opening. You taught me," she said. "Not directly, but you taught me that sometimes, not waiting to be saved, sometimes saving yourself is the only way." She pulled back just enough to look at him. "Did we win?" "Yes and no." Kazuhiro looked around, at the fallen guards, at the blood staining the tatami. "We won the battle. But the war between who I was and who I'm becoming, that continues." "Then we keep fighting," Naomi said. "Together, together," he echoed. And in that embrace, in that simple word, something unshakable was forged. They were no longer shogun and refugee, no longer protector and protected. They were partners, in every way that mattered. The months that followed were devoted to rebuilding, not only the castle, though that too, but the very idea of what it meant to lead. Kazuhiro never became the Iron Shogun again. He couldn't, even if he wanted to. But he discovered he didn't need to, because the man he had become, the one who balanced strength with compassion, power with humanity, was more effective in ways brute force had never been. The neighboring clans that had tried to kidnap Naomi withdrew. Not out of fear of retaliation, but because Kazuhiro did something no one expected. He offered peace. He offered alliances built on mutual benefit instead of conquest. He offered a different kind of future. Some accepted, others didn't. But the seed was planted. Takamori remained, not as a general, for he had renounced that title, but as an advisor, someone who understood both the old way and the new, and could help bridge the two. "You were right," he told Kazuhiro one day, months after the confrontation, "about everything. But you were also wrong." "How so?" "Right that compassion can be strength, but wrong about the cost. There's always a cost, Kazuhiro. There always will be. People will see kindness as weakness. Enemies will exploit every vulnerability." He paused. "So the question isn't whether you pay the price, it's whether what you gain is worth it. And you think it is?" Takamori looked toward the courtyard, where Naomi was teaching a group of children from the castle, not only the daughters of nobles, but of servants as well. She was teaching them to read, to think, to question. "Yes," he said at last, "I think it is. Because she didn't just change you. She's changing all of us. Showing that the world can be different, if we're brave enough to make it so." Kazuhiro smiled. "That came from you? The man who once demanded my death? People change. You taught me that." Takamori stood, adjusting the bandaged arm that still bore the scar of their duel. "Now I have to decide what kind of change I'll embrace." He left, his footsteps fading down the corridor, leaving Kazuhiro alone with his thoughts. Naomi was 18 now, no longer the frightened girl he had found on the battlefield, but a woman in her own right. She had become an integral presence within the castle, not as an ornament or symbol, but as a genuine force. Her counsel was sought not only by Kazuhiro, but by other leaders. Her voice mattered, and somewhere between months of struggle and rebuilding, what had begun as compassion had quietly become love. "You know we could never marry," Naomi said one night. They were in the garden, the same place where he had first seen her, shivering in the rain. Not formally. I'm the daughter of your enemy. You're the shogun. The rules can change, Kazuhiro interrupted. We can ignore them. I don't care about titles or ceremonies. I care about you. About this, he took her hand. About choosing to stay together, not because we must, but because we want to. People will talk. Let them. They've been talking for months anyway. At least now they'll have something true to gossip about. Naomi laughed, a sound Kazuhiro never tired of hearing. You're impossible. I'm a shogun. It comes with the territory. No, you're you. And that's far better than a shogun. They sat in a comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the night sky. Somewhere in the castle, councils were meeting, orders being written, the endless machinery of rule turning on. But here, in this moment, they were just two people who had somehow found each other in the middle of impossibility. What do you think your father would say? Kazuhiro asked softly. If he could see you now. Naomi thought for a long moment. I think he'd be confused, maybe even angry, that I care for the man who killed him. That I built a life among those he called enemies. She paused. But I also think, I hope, he would understand. That war ends, hate ends, and eventually we choose to heal instead of bleed. Do you still think about him? About that day? Every day, but not with anger anymore. Just sadness. For everything that could have been different if men like you and he had found a way to talk instead of fight. Maybe our children will live in that world, Kazuhiro said, and then realized what he'd just said. If you want children, if you want a future with me, I shouldn't presume. Naomi silenced him with a kiss. Their first, fitting now that she was grown, and the choice was truly hers. When they parted, she was smiling. Yes, I want a future. I want children. I want to build something that proves love is stronger than hate, that compassion can live beside power, that a man can be both shogun and human. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is. And when the world tries to take it from us, because it will, then we fight, as we always have. Together, Kazuhiro drew her close. I love you. I know they're just words. I know I said them too late, but not late, she whispered. Right on time. She rested her head against his shoulder. And I love you too. Not despite who you are, but because of it. Because you chose to change. Because you chose to grow. Because you chose humanity when it would have been easier to remain a weapon. They stayed like that as the stars turned overhead. Two people who had found each other in the ruins of everything, and chosen to build something beautiful from the wreckage. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There would still be challenges. There would still be those who mistook Kazuhiro's mercy for weakness. There would still be nights when he questioned whether he had chosen correctly, but he would never face them alone again. And that made all the difference. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of honor, love, or the cost of mercy, don't let it fade away. Like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes that even in a world of war, compassion still matters. Your support helps these tales of courage and humanity reach those who need to hear them most. There is a truth that leaders rarely admit. Power without humanity is not strength. It is merely well-organized tyranny. Kazuhiro learned that the hard way. He spent 15 years building an empire on fear and efficiency. He became exactly what a shogun was meant to be, invincible, merciless, absolute, and in the process, he forgot how to be human. It took a girl shivering in the rain, an enemy who should have been irrelevant, to remind him that beneath armor, beneath titles, beneath the crushing weight of expectation, he was still just a man capable of compassion, of change, of love, and that realization almost destroyed him, because admitting one's humanity in a world that demands perfection is a revolutionary act. It means refusing to play by rules that dehumanize. It means saying, I am more than my function. I am a person, and people feel, change, grow. His own samurai had demanded his death for that. They saw compassion as betrayal, a violation of everything they were taught to be. And they weren't entirely wrong. He had changed. He had become less efficient, less feared, less mechanical, but he had also become more complete, more real, more capable of leading through inspiration instead of intimidation. History remembers conquerors. It remembers the empires they built and the battles they won. But it rarely remembers the humanity they sacrificed along the way, the price paid in connections unmade, in love unfelt, in lives lived as roles instead of souls. Kazuhiro could have been one of those conquerors, remembered for centuries as the Iron Shogun who united Japan through sheer might. Instead, he chose to be remembered, if remembered at all, as the man who admitted that power without compassion is hollow, and that strength without humanity is merely weakness in disguise, and that choice, that refusal to sacrifice his soul on the altar of efficiency, was braver than any battle he ever fought, because anyone can learn to kill. Anyone can harden their heart until it feels nothing. Anyone can become a weapon, but to choose to remain human when the world punishes humanity, to choose love when love is vulnerability, to choose compassion when compassion looks like weakness, that takes a different kind of courage, the rarest kind. And it is that courage, not the sword, not the victories, not the throne, that turns leaders into something greater, something that outlives reigns and empires, something that matters. Naomi didn't change Kazuhiro because she was special or chosen or destined. She changed him because she was human, because she suffered. And he saw that suffering and chose to care, and in that choice, in that simple act of wrapping his cloak around a trembling girl, he remembered the truth that power always tries to make us forget, that we are measured not by what we conquer, but by what we protect, not by the fear we command, but by the kindness we show, especially when kindness costs us everything, not by the empires we build, but by the individual lives we touch with compassion, especially when it would be easier to look away. Kazuhiro was not perfect. He made mistakes. It took him far too long to change. And even after changing, he fought against 15 years of instinct every time he faced the choice between efficiency and humanity. But he kept choosing humanity, again and again and again, until the choice became who he was, and that transformation from machine back into man, from shogun into a human who still remained shogun, was a small, daily miracle, the kind the world desperately needs, but rarely celebrates. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this: power that does not serve humanity is power wasted. Strength that does not protect the vulnerable is nothing but glorified cruelty. And leadership that sacrifices compassion for efficiency is not leadership at all. It is mere management of human resources dressed up as nobility. You don't need to be a shogun to understand this. You don't need to rule empires or command armies. You only need to have faced a moment where the choice was between what was easy and what was right, between being efficient and being human, between protecting yourself or extending your hand to someone shivering in the rain. And in that moment you choose, not for reward, not for recognition, but because humanity, the capacity to see another's suffering and care, is what separates us from machines. It is what makes us more than survivors. It is what makes us alive. Cherry blossoms fall, empires crumble, victories are forgotten, but an act of compassion, the conscious decision to choose kindness when kindness costs something, that endures through the lives it touches, through the cultures it reshapes, through the ripples that one day become waves. Kazuhiro placed his cloak around a freezing girl, and in that simple, costly gesture, he changed not only 2 lives, but the very idea of what leadership could be. Not perfect, not invulnerable, but real and human. And for that reason, stronger than ever, may your own choices be just as brave. May your own power serve humanity instead of consuming it. And may you never forget, the world does not need more conquerors. It needs more people willing to take off their own cloak and wrap it around the shoulders of someone who is cold. even when it costs everything. Especially when it costs everything.